Hello. Hello there. I believe we are live.
All
Good
right.
to see everyone. Okay. We are here today with Johann Beukes, who is the. Oh, there we are. Hello, Johann. You're on stage.
There we go.
Um, Welcome, everyone. We're back for another CTO Craft Bites. We are here with Johann Beukes, I think. Is that right?
It's good because I'm terrible with names. So anyway, Beukes, Beukes, it's perfect.
Nearly there. Got it. Cool, cool. He was the Chief AI Officer and Fractional CTO at Spitless Systems, which is a software development company specializing in AI. And we are here today to talk about how AI needs to be thought of in terms of control, not adoption. We are past that point. A very, very big welcome to Johan. Maybe tell us a bit more about your role and your work there, and then we'll launch into the chat.
Well, thank you very much. I am very honored to be part of this group and speak to everybody. My role at Svetla, it's really dictated by our clients. Every client we see is going to be in a different position. So what we typically do is we have about 5 areas around AI that we engage with them. And it's typically on the leadership side very early on where they've never done any AI projects, never gotten any AI projects to production, but they're looking to get into it because they have a mandate from either their CEO or from Wall Street or something. Then we also have clients that will say, you know what, we're good, we understand how to get it into production, but we don't really know. We don't want to do experiments. We want projects that's a little bit more predictable, that there's going to be some kind of ROI, some outcome that we can measure. And we go and we do workshops and we work through it. We use this process called design thinking to get to the core of what it is that they're supposed to be building and how we measure that. And then we do proof of concepts. And this is one area that's different. My background, I started doing software development in the 90s. So I've been doing it for a while. Got into the big data era with Hadoop and all that, and then went back to school, got a master's in data science. Before it was the sexy job. I think that was around 2017 or so, that was the hype. So we do proof of concepts because unlike software development, if I were to ask you if you can build me a website, that's pretty predictable. You know what you're getting, you're going to check out, everything is good. But if you ask me, build me a model that can solve, let's say, a problem with 99% accuracy, that's unpredictable. I don't know if you have enough data, if you have the right data, if there's models out there that we can just use some additional training to get it to solve a business problem, or do we have to start from scratch? So the way we overcome that, there's a process, and this is something that's online. Go read about it. It's called CRISP DM. It sits on top of agile practices, but it's old. It comes from machine learning days, right? But we use that 6-phase process to kind of overlay how we attack our POC projects. So we have very strict processes around it to make sure that it's gated, it's not experiments, and there's always some kind of ROI. So your question was, how do I fit in? All of those, I kind of oversee. Some of the engagements I would work with the teams, with the CTOs, with the CFOs, and make sure that we're following the right procedures and orders. And it's really because it's unpredictable. It's probabilistic. And we're familiar with the hallucinations we see when we use language models. Well, at a big scale, that costs a lot of money. So.
Very cool. And what does your team look like within Spittler who are working on these proofs of concepts? Do you have specific roles who are responsible for control and implementation?
Yes. So we usually have a specialist, and I'll start there. And depending on the type of project, if it's computer vision, we'll have a computer vision specialist. If it's generative AI, even within that discipline, we've started to specialize where you have somebody that's really good at information retrieval, which is like RAG, or perhaps they're on the other side and they're on the agentic workflow side. It's really 2 areas that's starting to diverge, and we'll have those specialists around those areas. My background, that I went to school for, is data science, so I really enjoy those projects. But we also have within that, we have people that understands time series modeling, or Bayesian statistics, or whatever the area is. Along with that, along with a specialist, you'll always have some kind of architect, somebody that understands how do we scale this and get this into production. Now, I mentioned the POC earlier. That is to mitigate risk. So when we think about how we control, that's the risk control for us. But we always do it with how do we scale in mind. I've seen this a few times where we have a client come to us and say, we have this, vibe coded application that we did over the weekend. One of our brilliant engineers got it working. It's phenomenal. And then when we tried to push it into Azure, we found out it's going to either cost us $20,000 in tokens per month, or we just can't scale it because the processing, or whatever the reason might be. So we always have an architect, somebody that understands the technical feasibility of scaling that prototype or that proof of concept into production. The third role would always be somebody that's responsible for just the data layer. And it looks a little different from your traditional ETL. If you think about, data warehousing, you typically have reporting that goes into some kind of dashboard, for executives. It could be, we have quarterly financials. So you have to be very accurate in your data reporting when you do that kind of things. On the machine learning side, we very often will fill in blanks with averages, we will impute it with other values. And we do that because we want algorithms to learn. We're not reporting any quarterly results or anything. So we need somebody that understands when we build pipelines, when we transform the data, how do we do it? What are the mechanisms that we need to put in place for it to be repeatable? So that every time we run these algorithms, we can see if we just tweak one little variable, what does that do to the end result? That means the data needs to be stable, but even before that, the data needs to be transformed in a way that machine learning can actually use it.
Mm-hmm. And that's a process in and of itself, isn't it? That's,
yeah. And I would say that's the core team. Outside of that, this is something that I think is what makes our projects usually successful. Is we don't focus in the POC on, are we building a web app? Are we integrating with SAP or anything like that? Because it's too early. Until you've proven out that AI can solve the problem, why would you go build all the other infrastructure around it, right? And if you have tight deadlines, I get it, but you still want to measure and see, is it really solving your problem with an ROI that you can expect before you start investing in those other roles? And now you're talking about all kinds of enterprise. It could be mobile development, backend integrations, APIs, all kinds of other stuff that makes up that team. But the core team is data scientists, machine learning engineers with specialization, data architect or systems architects, and then just some kind of I want to say a ETL specialist.
Well, today's talk is going to be about control and risk management and so on around the implementation of AI. So let's have a think comparing to the previous paradigms that we've had. Obviously, you've been around this kind of project for a very long time. You've been through the Hadoop phase and the kind of going back further than that as well. I suppose with the sudden flood of commoditized AI endpoints and so on and so forth, what's different now in terms of how we manage risk and how we retain control in these projects? Have you seen a change? Have you seen a shift?
It's, to me, the shift really comes because we're not adding a tool, we're not adding a system, we're adding intelligence. And it might make sense to explain what I mean with that with an example. So I came up in my career programming, writing code. So exactly, you can test it. There's always going to be edge cases, but it's something that, I wrote. So I was very much in charge of it. With AI, the closest I can get to an explanation is we grow AI. We don't code it anymore. And the more you kind of grow it, it's like, planting a tree. You know this species, but you also know you need to water it and all the things you need to do. But you really don't know how it's going to look when it's big. You can look at other pictures of those kinds of trees, but you're growing it. You're not building it. With that, there's so many unknowns that you have to take care of. And any project that we do, from a POC all the way to end result, there's always going to be some kind of measurements in place, some logging, some tracking. Um, we start with the model. We look at model drift. What's the expectations for that model's performance so that we understand when it's starting to go into the wrong direction. And I'm talking about language models, computer vision, all of these are the same. We treat them the same when it comes to that. Because over time, models, they do get stale. They get new types of data, and you need to make sure that you monitor and you measure. The second area is going to be the data, because you also have data drift. If we, not that we want to think back, but if you think back about 2020, what happened, that's a huge outlier in any data set. And when you're starting to train models, you have to account for those kind of outliers, how the data is going to influence that model. Because like I said, you grow your AI, you don't build it. So the data is a big factor. So you have to measure it. You have to make sure that you understand when there's cycles or seasonality in the data. Before you even release it, you have to test and make sure that that is taken care of, those outliers. The third area would be just kind of protecting against technology shifts. And that might be a little bit more strategic than anything else, but a lot of times, let's say the latest new model comes out from OpenAI or Anthropic, how do you actually test it to see that it's doing better in all use cases, right? So we have a lot of frameworks that we put in place, different ones for different clients, because they have different tech stacks or needs or whatever. But the goal is to be able to test one version of that model, one version of the intelligence with the next version or the next family. And it's an area that I'm starting to see more CTOs are starting to think of it, but it's not top of mind. It's just like software. Let's just release the next version, do a bunch of unit tests, and it works. It doesn't. Your eval, your use cases when it comes to language models and Gen AI, you need to adapt those because your prompts are part of that. It's not just the question and answer. It's also the prompts that need to change. And these models are getting intelligent or more intelligent. And with that, they are changing some of their behavior. If I go back to GPT-2, which was when I first was introduced to it, versus what it is now, it's totally different, right? And it's 5 versions later. And 4 years later, 5 years later, maybe. So it's just things move fast. So you need frameworks around that. So I really think at a core, that is the controls that you need to have in place. Model tracking and measuring, data tracking, measuring, and then just frameworks that allows you to do A/B type of testing when you have new models or new families.
From your experience with the rate of model changes, obviously we're getting a huge stream of updates and bigger models and self-hosted models and so on and so forth. Does that make it easier or harder to manage that kind of control layer, that risk management?
I think both, and I know that's not a good answer, but I'll tell you why. So we are seeing a lot of progress with open source models. NVIDIA came out earlier this year and released a bunch of their models as well, where you can self-host it. So we're getting at that point where, some of the open source, some of the cheaper models are getting really good. So we're actually migrating a lot of our clients off from Anthropic and from OpenAI to some of these more open source, or even, a lot of it is from Asia. A lot of those models are just much cheaper and they perform as well. Also, I think people are getting smarter how they use these models. It's not just one model for everything anymore. If you have a whole agent stack, depending on the function of the agents, you pick the right model. And very rarely do you need Opus for all of your models. You probably don't. So, you can keep your costs down, you can keep your tokens down. However, that increases the risk. Even if you're not switching between family models, it increases the risk because now you're sending data, if you're using cloud services, overseas and, to places that there might be, different uses of your data. So now there's more risk involved in securing your data, securing the systems. So, a lot of clients, they're looking at alternatives. With Bedrock, with Azure, you get the opportunity to self-host a lot of these models. And that's what we're seeing, people moving away from just the more expensive, but also more secure and compliant models into just self-hosting. the good thing is that it increases people, just their general intelligence around how to host and monitor these models. So it's a good and a bad thing. You have some risks, but you're reducing cost and increasing understanding of what it is that we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose weighing up the pros and cons of self-hosting and having to manage your own stack and having to secure your own data and so on and so forth versus having it hosted somewhere. Um, as a smaller company, one might seem the no-brainer. You can host it for free, you can manage it yourself, but then you lose quite a lot of the control and the risk mitigation of having a larger organization who's already got the stack and the approach and sort of tried and tested. It's quite difficult to know whether to build or buy. Almost.
It is. And I think that is why it's super important with any AI project. I start asking the question, can we just do a proof of concept first? What is the core thing we need to prove out before we go and invest the time and money? Because these servers, just to host them, if you get TPUs or GPUs, whatever, they're expensive. So I'll give you an example. At Svetla, we're actually looking at implementing a specific agent around marketing. And we looked at, should we build it? And the answer is yes. Eventually, we can make the case that it's a good thing for us to build it and have that IP. However, we do want to test out and see what's the expected ROI. And we don't really know. We can only guess. So we're going to go pay for a service. Another company that hosts something very similar, I think it's like $10,000 a month. But that's a very small investment versus us building something for the next 3-4 months. We won't be at parity with what they offer. And we also don't learn the lesson. Is it actually valuable until we've paid those, that 5-6 months worth of work? So it's just, you have to kind of weigh what's the shortest amount of time to learn. I'm a technologist. I like coding, but I remember early in my career, I worked for this VP at a big office supply company here in the United States. And he always told us, our main objective is to sell pencils, not to write software. Even though we were the technology team. And it stuck with me because, if you can buy over build, buy it. If you're not in the business of writing software, I would encourage you to do the minimum. Get partners, buy off the shelf, because the maintenance, the understanding, just the upkeep, the tracking, and now that you're adding intelligence to it, it is becoming a much bigger scope. And years ago, the easiest equivalence I would have is when, CISOs became popular, and people started thinking about privacy and security and all of that as a job function apart from a CTO. It was interesting to me because whenever I met a CTO, I would always ask them, do you have a CISO as well, or do you handle that? And I want to say it's 50-50 over the years. It's really one of those positions that's not solid. Every company has one, but it is a job function of the CTO. And I think it's going to be the same with, just AI. It's going to probably end up 50-50 where you have experts, but as CTOs become more educated, they understand the risks, they understand how to mitigate it. It's one of those things where it's just another hat that we're adding to the CTO title. So I really think when we look forward, one of the big areas that there's going to be a lot of growth in just startups and things like that, we're already seeing it, is just around governance, security, and getting AI into production. AI on my desktop, not valuable, right? You have to get it to production. So small little experiments, test it, buy if you have to. And if you don't have to, build it, but know the risk.
I had another conversation in the Bytes recently with someone who was specializing in data sovereignty and the idea of kind of where the models are hosted and whether you host them yourself to sort of retain that sovereignty. I don't know if any of the projects that you've worked on have kind of had that necessitated requirement.
Yes, so the data is super important. I've always, when I went to school and I saw that title years later of 6 years job, data science, I always, look at what does the data give us? What's the advantage that we get from it? And we're working with a client. They have a whole bunch of educational institutions that they work with. So the data that they gather is all about university courses and professors, and it's a lot of that type of data. That data you cannot buy, so they acquire it themselves and then they store it. And until recently, they were using OpenAI, and we're in the process of migrating to Pinecone, which is another vector store. And the reason they're doing it is, there's a lot of functionality and features that they find is really a little richer with what they need in Pinecone. So that's why they're migrating. But also, one of the discussions is just they feel, there's a lot of development, and a lot of these companies are considering, now that they're going public, where is our data going to end up? How they're going to make money, because they're going to have pressure from Wall Street, from private equity, or whoever else, is investing. That's going to be like cutthroat. So they're trying to secure their data by moving it to smaller companies, not publicly traded yet, because AI is still the Wild West. Even, these companies going public, we're still trying to figure out regulations around it. One of the things that I also do at Svetla is I train engineers on how to use tools like Claude Code, project managers, project owners. And one of the things that we talk about is just when you're doing any kind of compliance and just checking to make sure that your gated checks, who owns the code, even if AI writes it, things like that. You always have to have that legacy, that tracking that goes along with it. And in doing so, who's responsible in the end? It's the person that that pushes the code, and if it's AI that pushes the code, it's the one that initiated it. What's happening is that if you're on-prem and you're doing a lot of that kind of work, your code is secure. You know that because you have the VPNs, everything is set up to protect it. But if your code is leaving your environment and is part of your business critical processes, you don't know where it's ending up. A lot of the teams that I initially engage with, they're trying to keep the cost down. So they're using, again, services like Olama. I use Olama for my for OpenClaw that I have set up. But it uses a lot of foreign hosted models. So everything I do on that machine, I'm aware of it. I also have NemoClaw, which is a little contained environment from NVIDIA, and it's using the Blackwell chip. And then on that, I run like my DNA sequence. I have an agent that runs and checks my DNA and then looks for research that supports any of the conditions and stuff. So I have my own little data scientist. That kind of data, I wouldn't trust, leaving that machine. That is self-contained. So it's just, you have to understand your code, your data, everything that you're touching in your business. If it's something that you don't want to reveal, you have to put measures and gates around it. Now, on the other side, I will say, if you're going to use OpenAI, Anthropic, all these companies, get everything in writing. And that's I encourage it, even if it's on their website. I always try and get in touch with a account manager or somebody that can help us set up the account and ask them, can you send me an email just with your policy, just so I have some kind of record? Because companies that's public, it changes a little bit less. But private companies, I don't know if you saw Cursor, just got, I think they got an offer. I don't know if it got accepted or what has to happen. But now imagine you have all of your code running through Cursor, and the company that buys them has a different data policy. You might have signed up for what Cursor offered, 6 months ago, but those things are changing now. So get it in writing if you're not sure, and if you need it, just host it yourself.
Definitely. Just very quickly, folks, remember we have a Q&A section. If you look on the right-hand side of the page, there's a speech bubble with a question mark in it. If you have any questions, post them in there. You can also vote on the questions. So when we come to answering them, we'll answer them in order of votes. Please do use that. But yeah, staying on the sovereignty, I suppose some of the things we've discussed there are kind of almost personal sovereignty of your own data, and where the data is going, but then also how you negotiate with the firms that are using the data or storing the data. That's data. What about code? So we did actually speak a little bit about cursor and codecs there, but
Yeah.
a lot of these models, all of your code base is basically being used to define how they work. How does that work from a control point of view? How do you keep control?
So I like to look at what we're already doing. If you're a good CTO, you have a really good plan around how you manage your code in GitHub. And if you don't want your code to go to GitHub, you have an on-prem version of that. We do use source control. So I always start by asking that question, where do you currently store your code? And if you're in GitHub, it really, to me, is the same as saying, okay, let's use Azure specific services, because at least it's the same family of companies that you're dealing with already. But then I have clients where, they're like, well, we don't trust sending our code off to, some cloud environment. And I'm totally fine with that. So let's look then at options for local hosting. And I'll give you an example. We have a client that they're a Claude Code shop. They've been using Claude Code for the past 6-7 months, and they wanted to switch. They're like, all right, we're getting a little concerned. Again, same reason. These companies are going to go public. We want to see first what's going to happen. Is there any alternatives without changing the process that we have? So Claude Code offers the ability for you to switch models. You can actually use open source models with it and maintain the same type of workflows. Intelligence goes down a little bit with using different models, but the workflows should remain relatively similar. So there's always going to be some kind of backup that you can use, either using different models that you can self-host. Like, for instance, the device that I have that I run my NemoClaw on, it also hosts language models for me locally. So if I have sensitive information, I use LM Studio, which is a local, like a desktop version of ChatGPT, and I connect to these open source models at scale for businesses. I think LibraChat is the one that I've seen the most, which is just a interface, and behind it, companies are using like Bedrock or some of the other other services from Azure and AWS. So there's alternatives available. It takes a little digging, and me living in this world and understanding, reading up what's the latest technologies and things that people are doing. It helps talking to somebody like me and networking. I was at a conference in London 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing just to talk to peers, and find out what they're doing and how creative they're getting with how they're measuring and monitoring and switching out. And then on the model hosting, a little bit about, if you're looking at self-hosting, language models are very hungry for data. They're pretty expensive in running, but it's no different from computer vision models. We dealt with this, when computer visions, I want to say when neural networks came out, 2017, 2016 was really its peak. We had the same problem. At the time, I was working with a lot of robotics, Boston Dynamics, if you know those dogs. And our biggest challenge was running models locally, because these robots, they're disconnected from the internet. So we didn't even have the option, to call some Azure service or something. So hardware catches up, cost can come down, but you really need to look at how do you protect it within the least amount of friction. I would start there first. And if you're already in Azure, you're already in GitHub with your code, I'll make the argument Azure is probably not a big leap to go to.
Mm-hmm. I suppose a lot of the secret source that we might have been very protective of, maybe 10 years ago, that was in our code, where there's less of that, maybe. That's a guess.
Just on that, the secret source part. So I want to talk about the data, because I think one of the big gaps that they think that the model is everything and it's part of it, but the data is really what needs to be more secure. And the reason I say that is these models are getting really good at extracting information from data, but without the data, you're not going to create that model. If you see there's some nefarious players that have reverse engineered Anthropic and OpenAI models by basically looking at their output. And that's their data to train their own language models, right? And I don't know if it's legal or not, but it definitely is not, it's not a good thing to do as a business, taking someone else's data and training, but it happens. So I would, when you layer it and you think about, the stack of importance, code is important because you have algorithms, you have, some proprietary information in there. So to me, code is definitely at the top tier, but not to neglect is the data that supports it. And in enterprise, if you have a lot of code that's running analytics or algorithms and stuff, I would isolate the code and really see what is the core that is really important, because typically it's not that much. I mean, if you go and look at any business, there's algorithms and they're typically encapsulated in some kind of model or something, but the data, I mean, you can't really isolate the data as much as you can isolate the code and the algorithms. So for me, it's really the data is a much bigger headache than algorithms at this point.
In terms of the companies that you've worked with, both at kind of Svitler and elsewhere, on building these proofs of concept, what has, if you're able to talk about it, what has been the most stringent in terms of the data security and data control that you've had to work with, and how did you sort of get around some of the issues and the constraints that you might have had there?
It's a good question. So we've worked with a nuclear facility, so a utilities company. You're not going to get much more secure than that.
Right.
I've worked with banks, and I'll tell a quick horror story just to kind of compare and contrast. So one of the regional banks here in Florida, where I live, I had an engineer contact me on Slack one day, and he's like, Johann, I just need to raise this because I just saw it and I need to know. He's panicking, full on panicking. The company gave us a database to develop on, just a development database with all of the information of the clients. And that was a bank. So we had to take steps and we did, but I couldn't believe that was, here's a copy of the production database. That was on the banking side. On the nuclear side, so first of all, we had to help migrate into a government cloud. So I don't know if that is something that is worldwide, but at least in the United States, AWS has this government cloud that has other protections around it. So it's got standard, the same services that you get from other AWS environments, but it's got a lot more security and hoops to jump through. So that project was probably the most secure. As far as the data, it was super. So here's the challenge when you do AI and machine learning. You can work with sample data to a point and create algorithms to a point, but at some point you really need to test it with production data. And now you have to put all these mechanics in place so that you can deploy models without having people, that's contractors, accessing the data and then interpreting the results. So government cloud at the large scale is where you want to start if it's super secure, if you can. And then just the isolation principles that we're all used to, having isolation of data, isolation of processing. Those two I always try and keep separate. And then even when you're developing your models, one of the things that it's a little bit of education that I still have to do is when we're doing development, we typically will do it in an environment where the processing and the data all lives in one environment. And then the only thing we migrate is the actual model that was generated, not the Jupyter notebooks and all the other code that generated that, So you still want to do security and compliance on that code that generates the model, but you kind of limit the risk if all you deploy to the next environment for testing is just the model itself. Now, models by themselves don't function well. You also need plumbing code. You need all the ETL, the data transformation, all of that, so that's a repeatable pipeline. So the way we secure it, we typically have different environments, just like if you were to promote let's say a website. You have your development, your staging. You might have a QA environment separate from staging, and then you have another environment which is your pre-flight. And the reason we do that is think of it as almost like an internal beta, where it's production data. You can kind of control and measure within a controlled environment without pushing it to the end audience. the worst thing you want to do is have your end users, identify bugs and things in your product. The problem is with AI, you don't have a blatant 500 error. The error you're going to see is going to be some hallucination or some wrong estimation or prediction. So we typically will have that pre-flight environment where we can test and really make sure, okay, with production data, we're not getting any surprises. Now, it's still going to slip through. I mean, you look at the big companies when they push stuff, every now and then there's hallucinations. They just cut off Mythos and some of the other models because they were able to hack them apparently. So, the best guardrails is not going to guarantee it. And if you understand that risk and what it means, I think that's kind of part of the role. We can't say 100% of the time, this is like recall, right? If I want perfect recall for a model, I just say, like, for instance, I want to predict the number of people that will be in a motor vehicle accident. Well, a model that is 100% accurate will just say nobody drive. Problem solved. 100% won't be in an accident. That's not a solution. So we have to find a good middle of the road solution for that.
So to speak, yeah, middle of the road. Excellent. We've got some great questions coming in. Let's bring a few of these up. We've got one from Nicholas, which is, what are the core values you teach your team on using Claude Code, as an example?
So workflow over tools. That's the number one. The tools are going to change, and they are changing. I want to say when we started, the very first team that I worked with was when Claude Code came out last year. And if you think about it, it's only been about a year that Claude Code's been out. It doesn't feel like it. The tools are going to change. And what we do is we have a very strict workflow, and I'll very briefly touch on it. When a developer starts their day, they do a command in Claude, and now they call it skills, right? And that skill behind the scenes accesses MCP servers. There's 3 systems. It's going to be the project management system like Jira. It's going to be the product description or the product requirement system. It could be Google Docs, or it could be Confluence or something like that. And then it's going to be the code base, which is GitHub or one of those code repos. Those are the 3 systems. So when I run that task, all that context is being brought locally, because that's one of the biggest misses for teams using code or AI tools for coding, is that they will give it all the context they have locally and all the context they have in their minds, but they might or might not use context from other systems. So we teach that workflow. And then let's say 3 hours later, I want to take lunch. When I do my start session skill, I get all the context. I generate a session plan for the next 3 hours that I work through. I use agents, or I hand code, whatever the mechanism is. But when I'm done, I do an end session, and we call it context loading and context dumping. So now I can pause in the middle, go take a meeting or take lunch. All of the systems, all of the work that I did locally, everything is updated. The reason we start with that is to get our engineers familiar with workflows. It's a simple workflow. It's something that engineers don't like doing, is documentation, right? So if you tell them upfront, just run this command, it brings all the context local. You do your coding, and then it pushes updates to Slack if you want, and it updates Jira and all those things. It's a very easy buy, right? So now getting them trained on other workflows that also uses AI tools is much easier. So workflows always over tools.
Yeah. Are those skills that you've built internally for your team, or are they kind of publicly available ones?
So I'll tell you what we did is we actually have a Claude marketplace, right, where we install the plugin in every project that we work on. If our clients want to use that, we give them a zip file with the 2 repos, one for the plugin and one for the skills. And then when they install the plugin, the way that we did it is it will create a variant. So let's say I'm working on a Java project. I install the plugin in my project, and then it walks me through a wizard, and it customizes it with sub-agents and tasks and stuff for Java. That same plugin, if I do it with JavaScript or with C# or Python, it will customize it for that. And then that variant, if as a company we want to reuse that, I can check it back into the company repo. So we're pretty transparent. We don't have that publicly available just because of, many reasons around liabilities and stuff like that, but we work with clients and we give them the code so that they can be self-sufficient to do that. And internally, we just have our own repos that we have plugins and marketplaces to manage that.
Very cool. Very cool. Cool. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Let's see. Do you have any advice on how to monitor and audit MCP traffic? So very specific.
I love that question because I think not a lot of people are thinking about that. So I want to say there's a couple of projects that we've started to test. I can't give you a firm answer or recommendation that this is the de facto, but I'm going blank now, but we have network monitoring tools in place, that you use for typical security practices that monitors the traffic. So we start at the traffic layer, and it's monitoring the typical, if you have a security expert, which I'm not a security expert, you'll monitor the typical traffic patterns, packets, things like that. In addition to that, we also started introducing like Datadog and a couple of other monitoring tools that looks at more of systems type behavior and logging and monitoring that. We have custom agents, which I hope we get out of. I would love vendors to come up with the solutions because I don't want to build, AI agents to monitor systems if I don't need to. If there's a product, I would rather buy that because it will be better. But we do that because, like, for instance, one of our clients, when NemoClaw OpenClaw came out in the beginning of the year, I probably had about 5, CTOs, VPs, director level people sending me emails and pinging me, Johann, what do you think of this? Because we read it's a huge security risk, but we want to try it. We want to use it. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. And this is how I manage mine as well. Don't give it access to anything. Give it access to one MCP. That MCP is going to be the MCP that has access to the systems. If you want to set up connections to Jira or Outlook or whatever, let that MCP be the proxy, and we can monitor one entry point and learn, because I don't know how this thing is going to behave either. So, I love MCPs for the fact that you can isolate and you can monitor one entry point. I also have, just going back to the coding that we talked about before, some of the clients, when we set up, those 3 systems that I talked about, one of our clients actually has a 4th system. They're a very database development heavy shop. They do a lot of work for clients around databases, and they have these practices that they want to enforce. So they have reference databases set up with schemas and everything that constantly change. They set up an MCP to basically display or to showcase the schemas and the structure to the coding tools. Well, when they did that initially, there was no security rails around it. It was one of their developers that just went ahead and did it over the weekend, and it was a cool project. And then they're like, oh, we probably need to have some practices around it. So we set up typical API practices with keys and tokens, the same stuff that you would do for your APIs, we just do for MCP. So to really answer that question is, I don't think there's anything different than monitoring APIs today. However, the intelligence part of it, we do track that in addition using agents, custom agents. And that's the piece that I hope in the future we'll see some tools, some vendors coming out with, and I actually think Datadog is one of those companies that's investing time to look at behavior versus just systems type level monitoring.
It'd be interesting to see whether those big observability companies do start bringing out more specific to MCP traffic. But it's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nanesh. That's a good one. Okay, up next, I have one from Carol. Let's see, is this coming up? Oh, it's not coming up. Oh, there we go. So the question is about adoption but control. Do you feel any type of resistance to AI adoption coming from engineers or leaders?
Yes, we still see it. And there's 2 areas. So the one area is just software engineers of my generation, I'll just say that, that's very hesitant because they have this fear AI is going to, at some point, they see the headlines, all these big companies laying off people because of AI. So there is that resistance, building custom AI agents to I want to say, replace tasks, not people. So I want to say there's a real fear, and also with that fear comes the resistance. What I'll do is I'll give you an example how we did this a couple of years ago. So when I worked with the robotics, a lot of robotics projects, one of the challenges that we had was we would go to a company that manufactures beer. Some might call them the king of beers in the United States. And they had a bunch of robots that we rolled out that were monitoring gauges. And you can imagine in a factory environment when you have analog gauges, to replace each one of those, you have to you have to have some kind of Wi-Fi, you have to have electricity. Those gauges are expensive if you upgrade them from, to electronic from manual or from non-digital. So a lot of reasons to have a robot just go around and use computer vision to capture what the readings are. If you have 10,000 gauges, that's what you want to do. Well, if your job is to have a clipboard and go around the facility every 2 hours and monitor and write down and then go enter it into a system, and that's your job, your retirement and everything is going to be predicated on you doing that job for the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be a resistance, right? So one of the things that we started focusing on very early on is that change management that comes along with it. And I've been fortunate. I'm not certified in Six Sigma at all, but I've worked with so many teams. I should probably at some point see if I can do like a green or a black belt. But there's a lot of really good practices around change management that, we don't have to reinvent. But we employ when we do our proof of concepts, we always engage with the end user, who's going to be the people that either benefits or that uses the technology. Now, when we build these systems, it never replaces a person. That's a myth. It will replace job skills or functions or journeys that a specific person might be doing, but it's not replacing the person out straight off. So as that change is happening, you have to encourage the people that's being affected to be along with the journey, and that's the change management portion. And I can't recommend, because there's many different factors that's going to influence how you do that, but it needs to be part of it. If you're a CTO that is thinking of implementing AI, you have to have a really good policy along with change management for your team. Now, the resistance is going to be there, so we know that. The plan, how to treat it, needs to be there as well. So to answer that question, it's really about, I don't think adoption has been solved, and it's not going to be solved soon. The more we replace, the more we change things, the more resistance we'll probably get. One of the other things I also do is I want people to understand what AI is good at and what it's not good at. So let's go back to the coding for a second, because it's an easy example. If I'm on a team where, let's say Carol, who asked the question, is on my team. If I know that Carol, I can rely on her for any kind of architecture questions, I've kind of created a profile, what she's good at. Now, Carol might not be good at asking questions about HTML. That is not her expertise. So I won't bother her. I won't ask her about it. It's the same with AI. If we're using tools and we're coding, I should know when the AI fails, we should do a retro and know, why did it fail? Was it the prompts? Was it just hallucinations because of the model? What's the reason? Because you want to build a level of trust on these tools as well. I encourage, when people use AI, to know where's the flaws, because it kind of brings down the myth of AIs replacing us, and it kind of reveals where they're good and where they're not good. And now it's becoming a tool. It's becoming something that I can control versus something that controls me. So
I agree with that.
That was a long explanation. I hope that answered your question, Carol.
Okay. I think the common things that I've seen and heard about where AI's kind of limitations are around judgment and taste, those seem to be the two most common questions, or aspects that we don't think AI is going to be able to sort of take away from us yet. As you say, judgment, such as knowing who's going to be able to take on a task around HTML or that kind of thing. Yeah. Seems like you can.
I like having phrases that I can tell people to remember, and I always say AI recommends, humans decide.
Right.
And it comes back to responsibility. If you ask let's say, just to make it simple, you ask ChatGPT a question. I never ask for one question. I ask for, give me 5 examples of, or give me 3 reasons why I shouldn't. The reason I do that, these are probabilistic models. So I can ask it 3 times and get slightly different answers, or I can ask them once to give me different answers based on conditions. So I want to make sure people understand AI should recommend, humans should be deciding.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Thanks for the question, Carol. That's a really good one. Okay, we've got another really interesting one here about specific frameworks from Michael. Can you name some of the frameworks when it comes to model tracking and measuring that you've had good experience with?
I'm old school, so ML Flow would be my initial go-to. ML Flow has been around for a while. I think it's open source. I can't remember. There's a commercial company behind it, but it's one of those frameworks that's easy to extend. And then what we do is we also, like I told you before, we create custom models around it. And now you're talking about agent frameworks, and it's not the best. So I don't want to even pretend it's the best, but it's the easiest one to implement. It's fast to implement, and it's also it's easy to update because it's very much, if you think about your background in software development, about composition versus inheritance, it's easy to compose agents together and functions together. So it's called Crew AI. So if you think about the stack, if you ask me, it's not the best stack. So it's probably not a good question for me to answer, but ML Flow, and then for custom agents, Crew AI would be the 2 that I bundle together for monitoring, tracking, measuring, all of those things. And then, of course, any of the systems, if you're in AWS or Azure, you have monitoring systems already available there. If you're already using it, keep using that. Just push your information into it.
Brilliant. Crew AI is a new one on me, so I've made a note of that. I've posted some links into the chat there as well, folks, if you want to go and
I'm going to say it again. I don't think it's the best out there. I've evaluated a lot of these. There's much better frameworks, but if you've never built custom agents, autonomous agents, it's a very good starting point. And it's also easy to talk to business people about it because it's a domain called a crew. Within the domain, you have agents with specific tasks. So you can say this agent is the report writing agent. This agent is the email communication agent. So you can give it almost like a job description. And then every agent have tasks and they have skills or tools with skills. So you can map out exactly what that agent's going to do. And when we talk about control, that's a perfect way to isolate and make sure that I can control it. It's also easy to plug and play. If tomorrow a new model comes out and I want to replace, or the job function changes, I don't have to change everything. It's just one aspect, one agent that's part of the crew that I have to replace. So it's flexible. Doesn't mean it's the best.
That's really good though. Cool. Thanks for that. Okay, we've got another question here. Oh, this is a very interesting one. The aftermath of the Fable Mythos rug pull. Love that term, rug pull. What do you have on? So we covered this a little bit, didn't we? But what are your thoughts around the whole Fable Mythos thing in general?
Yeah, I think I think data and code goes together. I don't think it's just code. I want to give the data as much credit. So whatever you're planning for sovereignty when it comes to code, I'll keep the data in mind. And specifically to the Fable Mythos thing, from what I understand, and I'm not read up on it as much as I should be, is that it was security vulnerabilities. The models were really good at finding vulnerabilities in code. And in doing so, it will reveal something that you can't easily fix, or it's going to be expensive to fix. So you're better off just keeping it secret for the time being until you can figure it out. I think having good practices around your just existing security practices around your code releases, how you do your penetration testing, all of those, that is table stakes. I mean, that should be part of every implementation, every design that you're thinking of. As far as these models, when they get released, it's going to keep happening. like I said before, once this model gets released, you're going to have, bad actors that's going to reverse engineer it, create other models without guardrails, because that's one of the things that Anthropic, from what I understand, is they're supposed to go put in more guardrails. However, the reason they pulled this is because somebody circumvented the guardrails that were in place. So it's the same problem we deal with in cybersecurity, right? Hackers constantly find ways around the protections that's out there. So it's a you have to mitigate the risk. When we talked about earlier, what's important in the code. One of the first things I do when we talk about code security is I ask which areas are critical that's really critical for IP or for security or privacy or whatever the reason is. And we kind of isolate and identify how to treat that code separately. One of our clients, and it's, actually the nuclear facility that I was talking about, they have some code that is accessible through the internet. Not directly. I mean, it's just, it connects to the web. Let's leave it there, right? So that code base is super secure. It's got a lot more hardening that happens to it before it gets released. The release cycles, the processes, everything around it is totally different. Now, if they ran their whole organization like that, they would never get anything done, because it for the most part, 80 to 90% of their code base doesn't need that kind of hardening and practices. So when it comes to code and how you isolate and govern it, it starts with understanding what is really important in the code. The website that's customer facing, that's really publicly accessible, that's probably not the most, spending a lot of money on securing that is probably not going to make sense. But your proprietary algorithm sitting somewhere on a server, maybe it's an AWS cloud server, or maybe it's an on-prem server, how you treat that code should be different. I mean, it's like you have a Rolex, that's going to go into the nice safe that you have. And then you have your Casio that you wear on your arm when you go shopping. You have to treat it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, I think we probably have run out of time for questions. Very nearly at the end of the session, but just to say a huge thanks to Johann for all the good topics there. We've got some great hints. We will be back in a few weeks. So Carol, who asked the question about resistance to AI, and I will be having a chat about resistance to AI on I think it's early in July, so please do come back for that. The details are on Slack. If you're not a CTO Craft Slack member yet, please do head to ctocraft.com and check out the community page. I think Claire has also pasted a link at the beginning of the chat in this event as well, so do come and join us if you're in a senior technology role. We will be posting the recording of this on YouTube. Keep your eyes peeled. But other than that, I will say thank you again to Johann. Thank you to Svetla. And thank you all for coming and for the amazing questions. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
You.
See you soon. Thanks, Johann.